Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a world without apps, without swipes, and without even the faintest notion of text me when you get home. Welcome to the medieval town fair, a swirling, muddy, chaotic blend of smells, songs, and soulmates. Maybe you're standing in a village square, crushed between the fishmonger and a woman loudly selling leeks. The ground is soft from yesterday's rain, and your boots are definitely not waterproof. Somewhere nearby, a man is trying to tame a goat that clearly didn't consent to this public outing. And right there, just past the cart with bruised apples, you see them, not in the modern sense of, oh, they liked my selfie, but in the purest, most accidental eye contact from across the ale bucket kind of way. Welcome to dating in the 14th century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You inch closer to the apple cart. It's technically not proper for you to just start talking. There are layers to this thing. Layers made of class, reputation, and your ability to not trip over that rogue chicken feather on the ground. Your heart pounds because you know how this works. Sort of. You think you might be allowed to speak if you're both unmarried, and if no older relative is glaring in your direction. But also, you might be misreading everything and end up with a stinging slap or a scolding from the parish priest by sundown. Fairs were often one of the rare opportunities where social classes mixed more freely. Peasants, merchants, journeymen, knights, even minor nobles might cross muddy paths in the chaotic blend of food stalls, puppet shows, and traveling musicians. In theory, that means romance could bloom in the churned-up grass between a stilt walker and the guy selling boiled turnips. In practice, though, your odds depended on far more than charm. For starters, the language of love wasn't words, it was glances. One look too long, and you might have accidentally promised marriage. Look away too fast, you just insulted someone's lineage. Medieval flirting was basically emotional Morse code, and you're not sure if you're blinking hello or I'm available for harvest. Then comes the moment. Your boots shift, your eyes catch again. They're smiling, a real smile. Not a polite my cousin might be watching smirk. The kind of smile that says, you're not like the other sweaty strangers covered in hay bits. And just like that, you're both doing the medieval version of swiping right, pretending to browse turnips while sneaking glances like it's a national sport. Now comes your bold move. You help them pick a good apple, not just any apple. The round red one on top, mostly worm-free, with that soft sheen that says, my orchard hasn't been cursed this season. Smooth. But just as you're about to say something clever, something along the lines of apples were sacred to Venus, goddess of love, which you totally rehearsed in your head, a bard starts tuning his lute, loudly and very badly. Your romantic moment is now fighting for space with a screechy rendition of Greensleeves, played like the strings are coated in marmalade. Still, the eye contact holds. And here's the thing, no one tells you. Medieval fairs were some of the most emotionally charged spaces in the entire calendar year. It wasn't just the mead or the novelty of juggling monks. It was the idea of possibility. You could meet someone whose parents don't already hate yours. Someone from another village who hasn't already heard about that time you accidentally burned down your family's pig pen. Clean slate, muddy boots. Mainstream historians agree that fairs were crucial social hubs, not just for commerce, but for courtship. They were especially important for peasants and tradespeople, whose daily lives revolved around exhausting labor and tiny social circles. Here, in this chaotic crowd, you could see someone new, someone outside your rigid little world. But historians still argue whether these encounters led to many actual marriages. Some believe they were more about flirtation and fantasy than practical matchmaking. Others point to court records of couples claiming to have met at fairs and formed marriage of affection, which was rare but not mythical. Meanwhile, a quirky fact for you. In some parts of Europe, young people would literally wear tokens of fruit, bread, or herbs to symbolize what kind of partner they were looking for. Carrying rosemary? You're a faithful type. An apple slice tucked in your belt? Fertile and ready for marriage. A leek? You've probably misunderstood the assignment. So you lean closer, apple in hand, lute in background, air thick with roasted pork and indecision. You ask their name. It's softly spoken, barely audible over the bleating sheep nearby, but it lands like poetry. You repeat it back, carefully, like a secret you're not quite allowed to know. Then comes their question. What do? You pause. You want to say something noble, something impressive. I'm a falconer's apprentice, maybe, but honesty wins. I help my uncle grind grain. There's a pause, then a grin. So, you're strong? You shrug like a medieval heartthrob. Only when the sacks are full. Boom. Sparks. Before long, you're walking together. Just a little. Just one loop of the fairground, past the mummers stage and the meat pies that are somehow 90% crust. Your hands brush once. That's enough to send both your hearts spiraling. Because in a world with no privacy, no dating apps, and very few ways to truly connect, a shared walk and a half smile was intimacy. And the fair, with all its noise and mess and danger, became the backdrop to something surprisingly tender. Then, of course, comes reality. The bells ring for evening prayer. You have to return to your stall. They have to check on their goats. And you don't even know if you'll ever see them again. But tonight, you'll lie awake on scratchy straw, replaying that walk, that apple, that almost touch. And maybe they will too. You wake the next morning to the sound of clanging. Someone's already milking goats far too enthusiastically. You stretch beneath your rough wool blanket, rubbing your eyes as the memory of yesterday flickers back. The fair, the apple, the smile, and then it hits you. Oh no, you smelled like onions. See, in medieval times, you don't just happen to smell weird. It's practically your signature. Everyone smells weird. The only question is what flavor of weird. Are you sweat and leather? Weird? Or are you I work with fish guts and store cheese in my bedroom? Weird. You didn't bathe yesterday, or the day before, or, well, let's just say your relationship with bathing is seasonal at best. And somehow, miraculously, they still smiled at you. This is where things get interesting, because in medieval Europe, bathing had a very complicated PR problem. In early centuries, especially under Roman influence, public bathhouses were common, and even encouraged. But by the late medieval period, depending on where you lived, bathing was either a luxury, a sin, or a suspicious act that might just invite the devil to hop into your pores. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages were filthy by modern standards, or simply had a different understanding of hygiene. Some say folks washed more than we think, at least hands, faces, and feet. Others say that full-body baths were rare due to lack of fuel, clean water, and privacy. You, however, haven't seen a bath in weeks, but you did recently rub a sprig, of sage on your armpits. So that's basically a medieval spa day. Now, to prepare for your next encounter, because you will go back to the fair, you grab your best tunic. It's only slightly moth-eaten, and the embroidery at the neckline still holds a faint gold thread if you squint. You also chew on some mint leaves, which were commonly used back then to freshen breath. Just ignore the rest of your teeth, which are doing their best with what they've got. The thing is, people expected love to come with a strong scent. Pheromones, sure, but also garlic, mead, the unwashed joy of someone who survived another harvest. Romance wasn't about roses and cologne. It was about being alive and vaguely edible. And yet, you're starting to worry. What if they notice the dried mud behind your ears? What if their cousin is an herbalist and judged your scent profile? The moment you step near, you try not to spiral. You wander back to the fairgrounds. It's quieter now. No lute players, no meat pies. Just a few leftover stalls and the unmistakable smell of trampled cabbage. Your eyes scan the thinning crowd. No sign of them. But then, a flash of color. Their cloak. You think. You hope. You walk faster. Too fast. You trip on a loose cobblestone and nearly faceplant into a chicken. And that's when it happens. The sniff test. You bump into an older woman, possibly a matchmaker, or possibly just nosy, who immediately sniffs in your direction. And not discreetly either. She leans in like she's trying to identify what you last ate based solely on body heat. This isn't unusual. In medieval dating, culture, scent, was strangely important. There are even accounts of love tokens being made from sweat cloths, or bits of clothing worn by the beloved. Yes, people gifted each other used armpit rags. That was romance. Please don't try this at home. In fact, a bizarre but documented custom in some Germanic regions involved bachelors sleeping with slices of bacon under their arms. The next day, these bacon sweat treasures would be offered to potential lovers to smell and assess. That's right, bacon-scented dating. You, thankfully, are not holding meat, but you are holding a flower, just in case. A little token you picked from the roadside. It's not fancy, but in the Middle Ages, the meaning behind a flower mattered more than the bloom itself. Lavender, devotion; daisies, innocence; a thistle, you might want to try again. Finally, you spot them. This time, they're near the cloth. Merchant's tent, inspecting wool, like they're about to make winter warmer for two. You approach slowly, casually sniffing your shoulder to make sure you don't reek of sheep dung. It's fine. You smell human. That's enough. You greet them with a smile and hold out the flower. They take it. Success. This is dating. Not candle-lit dinners or filtered selfies, but a conversation amid beetroot and linen scraps. A moment shared in the open air with no privacy and even less deodorant. Still, the attraction is real. You laugh at the same weird noise the merchant makes when sneezing. You both avoid eye contact with the town bailiff, who once tried to marry his cousin. And when your hands touch briefly, fingertips grazing as you hand them a thread sample, you both freeze for half a second longer than necessary. And here's where we circle back to something odd. Despite all the smells, the grime, and the daily struggle just to not die of a cold, people still fell in love. Not just in a we must merge land way, but in the way that makes your stomach flutter and your brain forget how to speak Latin. Because love, even in medieval times, found a way, even if you both smelled like turnip soup. So, you've officially exchanged a flower, a few giggles, and a promising glance with someone who now occupies 92% of your brain. Congratulations. You're dating, medieval style. Except, what now? In our modern world, you might slide into someone's DMs, maybe plan coffee, or awkwardly suggest a movie where you pretend to care about plot. But in your current reality, surrounded by cobblestone, thatched roofs, and a sheep with a limp, it's not that easy. You need to dress to impress, or rather, dress in a way that doesn't get you fined, arrested, or mistaken for a lord. Welcome to the world of sumptuary laws. Here's how it works. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially in England and Italy, there were legal rules that dictated what you could and couldn't wear, based entirely on your social class. If you're a peasant, you better not show up in silk. If you're a merchant, don't even think about fur lining unless you've got the coin and the reputation. And don't get caught wearing purple unless you've got a crown and an army. You head back home, open your little chest of clothes, and realize your options are limited. You have a plain wool tunic, a lopsided cap, and a belt that's more sentimental than functional, but you know how to work it. You tie the belt at an angle, daring. You roll your sleeves to show that one freckle-covered forearm that got some sun during harvest. Boom. Fashion. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws were strictly enforced or mostly symbolic. Some believe local officials used them more to shame rivals or collect bribes than to uphold purity of class. Others suggest they were deeply ingrained, creating a visible code of who could flirt with whom and who should not be looking at the baker's daughter that way. But here's the kicker. Breaking the fashion code was sometimes a deliberate move. A low-born suitor might borrow or fake finery to woo someone above their rank, kind of like renting a tux to impress your date's parents. Except your tux might get you publicly whipped. So today, you try a risky combo. Your good tunic, your cousin's embroidered cloak, borrowed without permission, and freshly cleaned boots. Well, cleaned in the sense that you wiped off most of the goat droppings. You want to send a signal, a very specific one. I'm respectable, but mysterious. Humble, but maybe wealthy adjacent, possibly literate. As you head toward the market square, you pass a group of young women giggling behind their shawls. One of them whispers something and gestures to your boots. They laugh harder. You panic for half a second before realizing you've got mismatched laces. Too late now. You lean into the mystery vibe. Maybe you're eccentric. And there they are, by the well, drawing water, lifting the bucket like they're starring in the romance scene of every bard's tale. Your crush. You approach. Smile, casually, mention that the baker's wife just got fined for wearing French lace. Scandalous. They laugh. You're both aware that clothing isn't just function anymore, it's communication. Here's a fringe tidbit. In Florence, sumptuary laws went so far as to limit how many buttons women could wear on their sleeves. Not because buttons were scandalous, but because tight sleeves with buttons meant a tailor had been involved, and that smelled like money. So yes, Sleeve buttons were sexy and forbidden. You can't make this up. Your crush points to your cloak. New, they ask, clearly impressed. You nod vaguely. Gift from a relative, you lie, realizing too late that your cousin stitched his name on the hem. The game is subtle, but intense. Every detail matters. You've heard that the richer families use scented wax to stiffen collars, so now you're wondering if you should start hoarding beeswax and thyme. You consider it. As you walk together through the square, you notice the glances. Older women taking mental notes. The priest frowning, probably preparing a sermon about modesty. Even your neighbor's cat looks judgmental. But your crush? They don't care. They ask if you've ever been to the Midsummer Festival 2 villages over. You haven't, but you say yes. Because suddenly, you're imagining dancing under lanterns, laughing under stars, and eating too much honey cake with someone whose smile softens your entire week. This is dating in the medieval world. No hand-holding yet. No formal declarations. Just subtle choices in thread count and color coordination. A slightly too long conversation by the well. The mutual understanding that buttons might be illegal, but love, that's still allowed. You return home as the sun begins to dip. The air smells of rain and baked turnips. Your feet hurt. Your cousin will definitely want his cloak back. But your heart, it's light. And tomorrow, you're going to figure out how to borrow shoes without visible holes. Because this thing, whatever it is real. And it's worth dressing up for, even if the law disagrees. You wake up earlier than usual. A rare burst of enthusiasm in your limbs that even the rooster can't match. The memory of yesterday's stroll, the glances, the whispered joke about buttons, the mutual appreciation of forbidden cloaks, still hums gently in your chest. You feel lighter, and strangely, nervous. Today, you're not dressing to impress, you're dressing to survive, because you're going where love either blossoms or burns. Church. Medieval life revolves around the church, not just for prayers and plagues and tithes, but for love, or more precisely, for not being in love the wrong way. You pass the chapel gate and hear the iron bell clang, a slow, almost accusatory tone. Inside, the air smells like incense, damp stone, and centuries of judgment. You genuflect, take a seat on a rough wooden bench, and try not to think about how close your shoulder is to your crush, who has naturally also arrived. You both glance sideways, not quite looking, not quite ignoring. The priest begins his sermon, something about virtue, temptation, and a parable involving a woman who admired too many cobblers. You wonder if it's about you, because make no mistake, dating in medieval times isn't just between two people. It's between you, your crush, the church, your extended family, and occasionally, an angry goose. You know the rules. The church watches everything. No premarital canoodling, no inappropriate touching, no spending unchaperoned time together, and definitely no bawdy. Gestures, a term which somehow includes singing too cheerfully. You glance at your crush. They suppress a smile. You suppress the urge to wave like a fool. Mainstream historians agree that the medieval church had massive control over courtship norms. Clergy could approve, disapprove, or even annul unions. Priests heard confessions and occasionally tattled. Monks wrote long, passionate letters warning against fleshly sin while quietly daydreaming about the baker's widow. But historians still argue whether most people actually followed the rules. Some claim strict obedience, especially in cities and among the nobility. Others believe rural folk were sneakier, more practical, and occasionally creative in bending the rules just enough to pass inspection. And trust us, people got clever. You hear a soft rustling behind you. Someone's passing a note, right there in the house of God. You'd be shocked if you weren't secretly hoping it's for you. It's not. It goes to a red-cheeked boy who turns purple and nearly drops it into the baptismal font. But the note reminds you, love finds a way. Even under frescoed ceilings and holy statues with stern gazes, you stand for the hymn. Voices rise, echoing off cold stone. Your crush sings slightly off-key. You find it endearing. Then you remember that singing lustfully was once considered a punishable offense, and now you're self-conscious about your falsetto. After Mass, things get complicated. The priest, a beady-eyed man with permanent suspicion etched into his forehead, steps outside to bless a pig. It's your chance. You move closer to your crush, carefully. No touching, just proximity. They whisper, "Did you hear the part about the cobbler's wife?" You grin. "I think he meant the butcher's." You both laugh, too loud. An old, Woman gasps. A small boy points. You pretend to be deeply moved by the Latin inscription carved above the door. Outside, the gossip begins instantly. You hear phrases like bold glances, cloaks too fine, and hands dangerously close to wrists. You know it's about you, and the worst part, you love it. There's something thrilling about this quiet rebellion. The way romance has to be camouflaged. You don't get to hold hands, so you brush sleeves. You don't get to declare affection, so you compliment their ability to recite psalms. Romance here isn't bold. It's buried like treasure. A quirky historical tidbit. In some communities, couples weren't just watched by family or clergy. They were watched by professional. Chaperones. Yes, a full-time job. You'd pay someone to follow you around and make sure you didn't kiss behind the bakehouse. And if you did, they'd report it. Probably with great satisfaction. You and your crush decide to walk together to the market, totally coincidentally. At the same time, you talk about bread prices, about the merchant's donkey that kicked someone last week. Every word is coded, careful, but then they surprise you. Are you going to the festival next moon? You pause. That's a real invitation. That's halfway to a date. You nod. I'll be there. If the priest doesn't preach a sermon about dancing again. They laugh. You both know he probably will. The church might be watching, but love still tiptoes around the pews, hides in candle smoke, and slips notes behind hymnals. Dating in the Middle Ages isn't about bold moves. It's about subtle defiance, about finding space to breathe in a world where every glance is weighed, every smile noted, and as you part ways, heart fluttering, you don't kiss, you don't hug, but your fingers brush for half a second, deliberately, and in that fleeting touch, an entire love story is told. You spend the next few days pacing near your neighbor's pigsty, which frankly isn't the best place for contemplation, but it's the only quiet spot where nobody interrupts you with, "Are you mooning over someone again?" Because yes you are, and you're trying to figure out your next move. Words, that's what you need, but not just, "Hey, you look nice in church." You need words that make someone melt. Words that get passed around the village until even the alewives are whispering. Did you hear what he wrote? Enter the love letter, the medieval missile of romance. Now, to be clear, most people in your class don't write. Literacy is rare, and parchment is pricier than meat on a feast day. But if you're lucky enough to read, or know someone who does, you can compose a letter. And if you do it right, it can change your life. You sit on a wobbly stool, charcoal in hand, tongue poking out in concentration. What's the medieval equivalent of thinking of you without sounding like a monk? You begin with a greeting. To the fairest soul who ever walked the market square. Too much? Probably. But you leave it. You include something poetic. Your voice lingers in my mind like the scent of rosewater, though I suspect it was goat. A joke, risky, but they laughed at your cobbler's wife impression, so you take the chance. Mainstream. Historians tell us that love letters weren't just a noble affair. Tradesmen, clergy, and even educated servants crafted passionate missives, often using poetic phrases borrowed from courtly romances. The language was flowery, dramatic, and heavy on metaphors. If your heart didn't burn, ache, or bleed, were you even trying? But historians still argue whether these letters were private or public theatre. Some believe lovers truly bared their souls in private. Others think letters were read aloud to friends, copied into books, and became village gossip within hours. Privacy was optional. You finish your letter, sprinkle a bit of crushed lavender over it for flair, and fold it carefully. No envelope, of course, just wax. Except you don't have wax, so you improvise. You melt a sliver of candle, press it down with the back of a spoon, and stab it with the closest thing to a family crest, your uncle's coin with a dent in it. It looks like a potato. Good enough. Now, how do you deliver it? There's no postman, no owl, no carrier pigeon trained in the language of longing. You consider asking your little cousin until you remember they once ate a chicken's foot as a dare and cannot be trusted. Eventually, you settle on the miller's boy, who agrees to deliver it for a slice of honey bread and strict instructions not to sniff it first. He runs off down the lane, swinging your heart in his grubby hand. You wait. Hours pass. Then, as you're pretending to inspect cabbages, you see them. Your crush. They're holding the letter and smiling. You don't rush over. That would be too eager. Instead, you do the slow, casual medieval saunter. which mostly looks like you have a limp. You nod. They nod. You think you hear a giggle. It's the most thrilling, terrifying moment of your month. Later, at twilight, they send a message back, verbally this time, via their aunt's friend's daughter's second cousin. The message is short but clear. You made them laugh. They like the smell. Victory. Here's your quirky fact. In medieval France, some noblewomen actually employed scribes to write test love letters for different suitors. Like medieval ghostwriters, but with more ink and less subtlety. Write me a poem, she'd say. Let's see if the blacksmith or the baker is more poetic about my ankles. And yes, ankles were very romantic. People wrote about ankles. You spend the night staring at the stars, wondering how you ever lived before this. It's not just about attraction now, it's about connection. And the letter, it made it real. That tiny piece of parchment, wrinkled and smelling faintly of charcoal and desperation, is now proof that something is happening. Something honest, something terrifying, something you can't wait to write about again. The morning brings new light, but your mind is still caught in last night's starlit swirl of ink and emotions. You wrote a letter, they liked it, they laughed. You're basically the Chaucer of your village now, minus the fame, money, and proper shoes. But love can't live on parchment alone. At some point, you've got to prove your feelings through actions. And in the medieval world, romantic gestures often look more like chores. That's right. In your world, nothing says, I'm into you, like hauling firewood, sharpening a plow blade, or helping someone defeather a chicken. Welcome to courting through chores. This isn't about laziness. It's about necessity. You live in a world where survival is a full-time job, and the best way to get close to someone is to become useful. Think of it as the feudal version of acts of service, but with a higher chance of blisters. You're not flashy, you don't have land or gold, but what you do have is time, strong arms, and a solid ability to carry 3 buckets of water at once. So when you hear their family needs help mending a fence, you offer, casually, like it's no big deal. They hesitate, then smile. Sure, if you don't mind the goats, you don't. You love goats. You might actually hate goats, but in love, you lie beautifully. Historians confirm that medieval courting often included shared labor. For peasants especially, love blossomed while hay was tossed or grain was ground. Some couples first met over oxen harnesses, their hands covered in the same mud. Poetic? Not exactly, but intimate in a way modern daters might envy. You arrive at their homestead with your sleeves rolled and your dignity ready to be trampled by livestock. The fence is old, sagging, and held together by 3 twigs and a prayer. You nod thoughtfully, then grab the nearest post like it offended your ancestors. They work beside you. You exchange no flirtatious winks, just shared tools, quiet laughter, and the occasional shout of, "That goat's eating the nails again!" Aunties watch from the doorway. Children peer around barrels. Even the family rooster, who seems personally invested in your failure, eyes you with suspicion. But you're making progress. You mention, casually, that you also repaired your uncle's roof last spring. They look impressed, or maybe just sun-dazzled. Either way, you take the win. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In parts of rural England and Germany, there was a tradition where young men would leave hand-carved love spoons on a maiden's doorstep. The spoon's decoration conveyed intent, hearts for romance, a wheel for hard work, even chains for commitment. Yes, spoons. Because nothing says, "marry me," like vaguely coded cutlery. Back at the fence, your crush hands you a water jug. You drink, you hand it back, your fingers brush. It's practically a declaration. Then comes the big test. Their mother asks you, point blank, "Do you know how to pluck a chicken?" You nod confidently. Inside, you scream. The chicken is large, angry, possibly possessed. They hand it to you. You take it like a precious object. It squawks once, dramatically. You manage not to flinch. You begin the task, feather by feather. Your crush watches clearly, enjoying your struggle. You make a joke about the chicken being more stubborn than the village priest. They laugh. You relax. By evening, your hands are sore, your clothes are dusted in straw, and your pride is somewhere under the porch. But as you rinse your hands in the trough, they come over. That was helpful, they say. Not everyone would do that. You shrug. I'm not everyone. Smooth, they smile. Come by tomorrow, we'll be baking. Another date, another chore, another chance to prove that love isn't just in letters, it's in the doing, the shared sweat. the unspoken partnership formed over squawking birds and collapsing fences. Historians still debate whether these acts were romantic or simply practical. But you know the truth. You didn't fix that fence for practice. You did it for them, because every swing of your hammer was a little love poem in disguise. And if that's not romance, what is? Your hands are still sore from yesterday's chicken plucking escapade, and your muscles ache in places you didn't know existed, especially your left thumb, which the chicken bit like it was settling a vendetta. But none of that matters, because today you're going to a jousting tournament, and not just to watch, you're there to impress, or more precisely, to be impressed for. Because in medieval times, if someone hurled themselves off a horse in your honor, that meant something. It was basically the medieval version of someone writing a song about you and performing it shirtless on TikTok. You arrive at the field early. The grass is still damp from morning dew, and peasants are already gathering with baskets, ale, and an alarming number of small dogs. The air is thick with anticipation, mud, and the smell of roasted meat that's definitely been sitting out too long. Your crush is already there, standing with their family near the edge of the tilt yard, the fenced area where men in metal will try to knock each other unconscious for fun and/or social mobility. You join them casually, trying not to trip on the uneven ground or appear too eager. You nod to their uncle, who squints at you like he's still deciding whether you're potential marriage material or just a really determined neighbor. Trumpets blare, horses stomp. A knight in blue armor rides out, his armor shining in the sun, plume bobbing like a very proud feather duster. The crowd cheers. Then a second knight appears, this one in red, looking like he hasn't slept since last Lent. You lean in and whisper, "I bet the blue one falls first." They grin. "If he does, I'll owe you a pie." You're fully invested now. Mainstream historians describe jousting as a blend of sport, ceremony, and social theater. It wasn't just about strength, it was about symbolism. The tilt, the armor, the banner carried by a lady. It all told a story. And often, that story involves someone watching from the sidelines with far too much emotional investment. But historians still argue how often people actually jousted for romantic reasons. While chivalric literature glorified the notion of winning a lady's favor with broken ribs, most real tournaments were more about political prestige, manly ego, and keeping blacksmiths employed full-time. Still, there were moments, especially in noble courts, where knights wore the colors of someone they admired, a token tied to their arm, a ribbon in their lance grip, even a garter if things were spicy. These symbols didn't just say, "I'm fighting," they said, "I'm fighting for you." So when the third rider gallops in, his banner flapping with what looks suspiciously like your crush's family colors, your heart jumps. You glance at them, they blink, slowly, then smile, just once. You try to breathe normally, which is difficult when someone might literally get concussed in your honor. The match begins. Wooden lances shatter, horses whinny, armor clanks. The blue knight misses entirely, as predicted. Red knight takes a hit to the shoulder and spins off his horse in a dramatic display of gravity and poor posture. But the third, the one with your banner, he lands his strike, clean, sharp. The other rider stumbles, wobbles, and falls. The crowd erupts. You definitely don't cheer too loud, or pump your fist, or yell, "That's my emotionally symbolic horseman." Nope, definitely not. Your crush leans in. "Pie it is then. Now it's your turn to be smooth." "Strawberry," you say, if you're feeling sweet. "Meat," if you're feeling traditional. They laugh, loudly. You're winning. Then comes the post-joust procession, because nothing says, "I almost died" like a slow walk around. The crowd while people throw flowers and cabbage in appreciation. The victorious knight rides by. He meets your eye. Then he bows his head. To you, you glance at your crush. They're staring, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. And in that moment, you are not a peasant in worn boots. You are a muse. A muddy muse, but a muse nonetheless. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some courts, especially in Burgundy, it was tradition for knights to dedicate their entire performance to a single lady, and failure to win could be seen as her fault. That's right. I fell because her ribbon was cursed. Romance was dramatic and petty. The tournament ends. The crowd disperses. Your crush turns to you. That was something. You nod. I try to inspire minor head injuries. They snort. Walk me home. Yes. 1,000 times yes. You walk slowly, talking about horses and helmets, and how uncomfortable armor must be in the summer. They admit they've always liked tournaments, not for the violence, but for the feeling, the energy, the story of it all. And you get it, because today, the story included you. Maybe it's silly. Maybe nobody should risk a broken femur just to flirt. But maybe, just maybe, love is a little bit silly and a little bit bruised. And honestly, worth every splinter. You didn't sleep much last night. Not because of noise or goats or the rooster who seems to hate your face specifically. No, you stayed up thinking about what comes next. You've walked, you've joked, you've written the slightly embarrassing but effective letter. Now you want more than fleeting touches and shared pie. You want a moment alone, which, in medieval terms, is dangerous. Because in this world, private romance is basically a misdemeanor. But there is one place where boundaries get blurry, the castle garden. You've heard rumors, quiet ones, that behind the tall hedges and among the roses, people meet, lovers mostly. Whispers say a noble once planted a rose bush just so he could pretend to check on it every time he needed to kiss someone who wasn't his wife. You don't have a rose bush, or a castle, or a title, but your crush does have a distant relative who serves as a page in a small manor just outside the village. And this manor, you've discovered, has a walled garden with paths and hedges, and a crumbling stone bench that, according to your source, has seen things. You offer to help deliver a basket of herbs to the manor. Your crush volunteers to come with you. To make sure you don't eat all the parsley, they say, clearly flirting. You assure them your self-control has grown stronger. You set off, just before noon. The sky is clear, the air smells like soil and distant bread, and the dirt path winds gently between wildflowers and sheep, who clearly judge your fashion sense. At the manor gate, you nod respectfully to the guards. They don't stop you. You're holding a basket. People with baskets are harmless. Inside, it's everything you imagined. Vines curling up old walls, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, and a garden that seems oddly quiet, as if even the bees. No secrets are blooming here. Your crush gestures toward a row of lavender. We could sit for a bit. Could you? Should you? Yes. Yes, you do. You sit on the bench, not too close, but not too far. The kind of distance that invites leaning in if things go well, and offers a dignified retreat if someone's aunt suddenly appears. Mainstream historians agree that noble gardens were often places of covert connection. Unlike bustling halls and supervised feasts, gardens offered a rare illusion of privacy. Some even had designated lovers' paths, carefully curated for strolling, sighing, and occasionally making bad decisions. But historians still argue whether these moments were innocent or orchestrated. Some think young nobles were constantly monitored, even in the hedges. Others believe that servants often turned a blind eye, especially if bribed with sweetbread, or a promise not to mention that night with the stable boy. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some French courts, couples played a game called the Garden of Love, where each person would pick a flower representing how they felt. Roses for passion, violets for modesty, marigolds for jealousy. Medieval mood rings, basically. You and your crush aren't playing that game, but your heart's playing its own. You talk about the fair, about the jousting, about the goat who keeps trying to enter the chapel. Then the silence. Not awkward, not tense, just still. They look at you. So, is this allowed? You know what they mean. You're not betrothed. You're not noble. You don't have permission. And yet, here you are. You answer honestly. Probably not. They laugh softly. Good. And then, maybe it's the flowers. Maybe it's the stolen sunlight. Maybe it's the sheer thrill of defying both your grandmother and the local priest. But your hands touch. Fingers, at first. Then palms. Warm. Careful. Real. You don't kiss. That would be reckless. And possibly punishable. But your head leans slightly closer. Just enough to feel their breath when they whisper, "I'm glad you wrote that letter." You whisper back, "I'm glad you answered." You hear footsteps in the distance. A gardener? A guard? Who knows? You stand quickly. Adjust your sleeves. Pretend to admire a bee that isn't there. You walk back together, side by side, like nothing happened. But something did. And now, whenever you see lavender, you'll remember how close your lips came to defying every rule your mother ever drilled into you. Love in the Middle Ages isn't loud. It isn't public. It's cautious, quiet, and hidden behind rose bushes. And somehow, that makes it even sweeter. You try to focus the next morning. Really, you do. You're supposed to be turning barley into flour, but your mind keeps drifting back to lavender. fingers touching, and the whisper that still echoes in your head. I'm glad you wrote that. Letter. The wheel turns. Grain falls. Your heart does a little somersault, but now you've got a new problem. You're hooked, and you're wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's a shortcut to sealing the deal. Something faster than chores. Something stronger than parchment. Something magical. Yes, you heard right. Because in the Middle Ages, love spells and potions weren't just stories. They were serious business. You asked discreetly, carefully, around the village. Mostly older women. Not the kind who tattle to the priest. The kind who brew nettle tea for sore joints and whisper to their cats like they're making deals. One of them, old Marit, narrows her eyes at you when you ask. Love potion, she rasps. You sure you want that sort of help? You nod. She leans closer. It always works. But sometimes, not the way you hoped. You gulp. She grins. Mainstream historians confirm that love potions were widely believed in medieval Europe. Recipes varied, sometimes sweet and herbal, sometimes foul and suspiciously chunky, but the intent was always the same: make someone feel what they otherwise wouldn't. Some potions included honey, rose petals, or saffron. Others, let's just say, not things you'd put in soup. There are documented cases involving bat wings, crushed beetles, and even bodily fluids. Yes, that's right. People got desperate. You tell Marit you'd like to keep things PG. She hands you a tiny vial of liquid and a cloth pouch of herbs. Slip this into something warm, she says, and think very hard about what you want. You nod, carefully. But then, doubt creeps in. What if they do fall in love with you, but only because of the potion? What if it wears off? What if it works too well, and they follow you around reciting poetry at inappropriate moments? You consider the risks. Then you toss the herbs in a stream and keep the vial, just in case, for emergencies. Later that day, you meet your crush at the market, by accident, on purpose. You're holding a bag of carrots. They're holding cheese. Romance. You walk together. No potion, no spells, just small talk and stolen glances. And you realize something unexpected. You don't want magic. You want them as they are, choosing you as you are. Still, you do. Ask casually if they've heard of any love potions. They laugh. Once, my cousin tried one. Ended up marrying a woman who liked frogs more than people. Noted. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In parts of Eastern Europe, young women would bury bread soaked in their own sweat under a lover's doorstep to bind his affections. If he stepped on it unknowingly and still felt warm toward her, true love. If he got sick, well, maybe love wasn't in the stars. Historians still argue how seriously people took this. Was it folklore? Real belief? Or just desperate teenagers trying to outwit chaperones? You don't know. But you do know this. The strongest spell today was the way their eyes lit up when you joked about your flower-covered hair. No potion needed. You walk them home, skipping the hedge route this time. Too risky. Instead, you talk about bread prices, dog names, whether goats dream. You don't cast spells. You just fall deeper. And as the sky turns orange and a wind picks up, you swear, just for a second, you feel a pull between your hands, like an invisible thread gently tugging you closer. If it is magic, it's the good kind, the real kind, the kind that doesn't need a recipe. The next time you see them, there's music in the air, not just wind-rustled trees or the distant clank of someone fixing a cart axle, but real music, plucked strings, reedy flutes, and a voice trying very hard to hit the high notes. You round the corner of the village square, and there he is, the bard, skinny, sunburned, and grinning like he knows secrets. He's perched on a barrel, strumming a lute with all the confidence of a man who's definitely slept in someone else's barn. His hat is floppy, his songs are bold, and every lyric rhymes with either love or glove, regardless of logic. Your crush is there, standing near the edge of the crowd, smiling softly. You take a place beside them and murmur, "If he sings about goats, I'm leaving." They stifle a laugh. He already did. You both listen as the bard croons a love ballad so dramatic it makes your letter sound like a grocery list. Something about two forbidden lovers and a jealous cowherd with a tragic end involving drowning and cheese. It's hard to follow, but the melody is oddly charming. Mainstream historians tell us that bards, minstrels, and troubadours were more than just wandering musicians. They were medieval influences. Songs could make or break reputations. A clever verse might immortalize a flirtation. A badly timed rhyme might doom it forever. In noble courts, Troubadours were often commissioned to compose poems about real people using fake names. Everyone would pretend not to know who the poem was about while absolutely knowing. These performances walked a fine line between art and very public emotional exposure. You glance at your crush. "Should we request something?" They smile. "What would you even ask for?" You look at the bard. You think about lavender, stolen moments, and that almost kiss in the garden. "Something soft," you say, "but a little funny." The bard's ears twitch. He strums. A song for the lovers who never kissed, whose hands just brushed, whose names were missed, who passed like whispers in morning fog, and dreamt of dancing near a log. Your crush raises an eyebrow. Near a log, you shrug. It rhymed. They laugh. "He's better than last year's guy. That one rhymed kiss with bliss 12 times. But here's the thing. This isn't just a performance. It's a moment. In medieval Europe, music was currency, especially in courtship. If someone wrote you a song, they were serious. If a bard sang about you, scandalous. Historians still argue how much of troubadour culture reflected actual romantic life. Some believe it was fantasy, idealized love no one actually lived. Others point to personal letters, court documents, and intercepted poems as proof that these songs meant something, and that lovers often use music to say what they couldn't speak aloud. You, at least, believe in it now, because when the bard sings a final line, their heart spoke loud where lips were still. Your crush reaches for your hand, just briefly, just enough to let your pinkies press together in plain sight. A bold move, in front of witnesses, with music to frame it. A nearby baker gasps. The woman beside her smiles and mutters, "About time." You don't care who sees. You're not holding hands exactly. You're just connected. The bard winks at you, then starts a new song about pickpockets and ale, and the moment drifts away, casual and light. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, especially in southern France, couples would compose tenso poems, collaborative verses where each person added lines. Think of it like musical flirting, except in verse, and usually in Occitan. You're no poet, but you can nod in rhythm. You can whisper something that makes them laugh during a drum solo. You can look at them like their voice is your favorite melody, and when the music ends, the crowd scatters. But you two linger. They say, "We should go." You say, "We should stay." So you stay, just a little longer, sitting on the steps of the well, sharing a piece of bread, and humming that soft refrain about missed names and morning fog. No spell, no garden, just song, and the unspoken knowledge that today, the music, said everything. By now, your little courtship has attracted attention, not just from your own friends or their ever-watchful aunt with the face like a permanently disapproving cheese, but from the entire village information network, also known as everyone who owns a window. You can feel it in the way people pause when you pass, the way conversations quiet just a little too perfectly when you walk by the bakery. You know your name is being whispered in kitchens, stables, and over water buckets. Welcome to medieval, dating under surveillance, chaperones, curtains, and courtyard gossip. It starts innocent enough. You and your crush plan to walk to the market together, maybe share a meat pie, maybe make fun of that merchant who talks to his onions. But when you show up, you're met with a surprise. Her cousin, let's call her Matilda. She's 14, wide-eyed, and clearly on a mission from someone in authority. "I'm coming," she says, clutching her shawl like a badge of moral defense. You nod. Of course she is. Mainstream historians explain that in medieval society, particularly for young women of any family with a shred of pride, unchaperoned time with someone of the opposite sex was considered risky, not just for reputation, but for marriageability. If a woman was seen alone too often with a man, people would assume things. And once assumptions began, even the priest's disapproval couldn't erase them. So Matilda tags along. She walks 5 paces behind, then 6, then suddenly sprints ahead to look at this rock. You can't tell if she's trying to spy or give you space. Possibly both. You try to ignore it. You pass a group of women seated by the fountain. They're spinning. Wool. Also spinning stories. One of them lifts an eyebrow so high it could count as a hat. Another nods toward you and whispers something behind her hand. You murmur to your crush, "I think they're plotting our wedding." They snort. "They're probably wondering how you caught me without a dowry." Touché. You buy 2 apples. You try to eat them casually. But there's something about public eating beside your maybe partner, while a teenager watches, and a neighbor with 3 goats evaluates your chewing, that makes romance feel clinical. A sneeze echoes from a window overhead. You look up. There she is, window lady. You don't know her name. Nobody does. But she is always there, peeking through her curtains, like she's running her own intelligence network. You lock eyes. She disappears. You whisper, "We've been seen." Your crush whispers back, "We've always been seen." Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In certain Italian cities, there were literal courting windows, small, decorative balconies or grates where women could safely talk to suitors while being watched from inside. Romantic, sort of, comfortably. Awkward? Definitely. You try to regain a sense of spontaneity. You joke about the time you accidentally called the blacksmith's pig "Sir." They laugh. Matilda giggles too. You shoot her a look. She shrugs. It was funny. Then someone calls your crush's name. It's their mother. She's holding a basket. She eyes you both, then says, "Don't linger. Bread waits for no one." You nod respectfully. You've passed the mother test. For today, as you part ways, your crush leans in and whispers, "Next time, I'll try to lose Matilda." You grin. Tell her the rock moved. That might do it. Historians still argue whether these chaperoned walks helped or hurt budding relationships. Some believe it gave couples a safe way to bond without scandal. Others argue it created pressure, tension, and forced performance. Every word, glance, and accidental elbow touch becoming a public negotiation. All you know is, it's exhausting. You miss the freedom of gardens and music, but you also realize something strange. You like that people know, that they're watching. Not because you crave attention, but because it makes this feel more real, more solid. People gossip about things that matter, and right now, you matter together. Even if there's always a cousin 3 steps behind, a curtain twitching, and someone dramatically coughing, just so you know they're listening. Love in the Middle Ages doesn't happen in secret. It blooms in the middle of the square, under scrutiny, wrapped in rumors, and somehow thrives. You think you've grown used to the rhythm of it. Gossip in the morning, stolen glances at noon, possibly being blessed or scolded depending on who overhears you by dusk. But then, one evening over soup, your mother says it. They're a good one. You could do worse. You blink, nearly drop your spoon. That's not a warning. That's support. Welcome to a new level of medieval romance. Arranged marriage meets actual chemistry. See, you always thought marriage would be arranged. That it'd be about land, goats, alliances, or debts from 3 harvests ago. Not something you chose, and certainly not something with feelings involved. But here you are, and now people are whispering. Not warnings this time, suggestions, proposals, possibilities. You spend that night replaying everything. Your first glance at the fair, your flirtatious fence mending, the not-a-date garden walk, even Matilda's failed espionage attempts. And you wonder, is this love, or just a good match? Mainstream historians explain that arranged marriages were the norm in medieval Europe, especially among landowning families. Love wasn't irrelevant, it was just secondary. Parents looked at wealth, family reputation, fertility, and dowry size before they ever considered how 2 people looked at each other across a steaming pie. But here's the thing, sometimes those matches worked, and sometimes love found its way in anyway. You meet your crush near the chapel 2 days later. It's quiet. You talk about bread again. Bread is safe. Bread is neutral. But then they say, "I heard your uncle spoke to my father." Your stomach flips. "He did?" They nod. Nothing formal, just questions. This is happening. You sit down on the low stone wall, both pretending not to be terrified, and you say what you've been too nervous to say before. "Do you want this?" They're quiet. Then, "I want you." The rest, we figure out. A breeze picks up. A bird sings at exactly the wrong time. You smile anyway. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In 12th century Spain, there was a legal form of marriage called sponsalia de futuro, where couples were engaged by mutual promise. No priest, no witnesses, just 2 people agreeing aloud. If repeated and consummated, boom, married. The church later tried to regulate it, but for a time, secret spoken vows could make you legally bound. You glance at your crush. "I'd still marry you," you say softly, "even if we had to live in a grain shed." They laugh, "As long as it's not the one with the rats." And this is where it hits you. Love, for all its risks and messes, has snuck up and wrapped itself around you like ivy on stone. You didn't plan it. You weren't allowed to plan it. But now, it's real. Historians still argue whether medieval couples ever truly had a say in their fate. Some believe parental control was absolute. Others point to court documents, runaway marriages, and love letters that prove, at least sometimes, the heart won. You decide to be hopeful. You and your almost partner walk slowly through the village, hands nearly touching, hearts doing that thump-thump thing that no amount of church lectures can suppress. Children shout. Matilda waves. Even the window lady smiles once. By the time you reach the edge of the village, the sun is setting behind the fields. Gold spills over everything. Your future, it seems, might be stitched together with both tradition and tiny rebellions. And tonight, you sleep, knowing that maybe, just maybe, you're not falling into an arranged marriage. You're stepping into one, with your heart in it. Just when things are finally starting to align, hearts, families, potentially goat-free grain sheds, it happens. A cough in the distance, a child with red cheeks, then the whispers, someone's sick, and not just sniffles from sheep kind of sick, the serious kind, the kind that has the priest looking nervous, and the apothecary boiling everything that doesn't move. You don't panic right away. It could be nothing. But within a week, the shutters start closing. People stop lingering in the square. And suddenly, you're not thinking about lace sleeves and love letters. You're thinking about plague. Because this is medieval love in the time of death. Romantic, right? Mainstream historians agree that plagues, especially the Black Death, did more than just wipe out half the population of Europe. They transformed society, faith, economics, and yes, romance. When death feels close enough to tap you on the shoulder at any moment, everything changes, including how quickly someone proposes. You meet your crush near the well. Both of you are wearing herbs tucked into your collars, like that's going to stop anything. You're trying to stay apart, but the fear is pulling you together. I heard 3 people from the next village are gone, they say softly. You nod. The apothecary's leaving flowers at every doorstep. Neither of you says it aloud, but the question hangs between you. What if this is it? You find yourselves walking again, this time toward the orchard. It's empty, quiet. The birds seem to know something's wrong. They stop beneath a tree and look at you. Would you still marry me if things get worse? You don't answer right away. You're thinking of your uncle coughing, of your little brother being sent to the woods, just in case, of the priest sweating through his sermons. But then you say, I'd marry you now. Here's your quirky tidbit. During plague times, marriage rates increased. People rushed to make unions official before it was too late. Some believed dying unmarried doomed your soul. Others just didn't want to die alone. Either way, weddings happened fast and often with very little ceremony. Your crush blinks. Now? Now. They smile. And suddenly, despite everything, the tension, the fear, the gathering storm, you both start to laugh. Not because anything is funny, but because everything else feels too big. And laughter, in this moment, is the only thing that belongs to just you two. Historians still argue about the emotional state of medieval communities during outbreaks. Some say people lost faith, withdrew, hardened. Others point to journals, songs, even love poems written in the middle of it all, as proof that even surrounded by death, people still loved. You believe the latter. Later that day, your families gather. A priest is found, somewhat pale, very willing. Bread is broken, hands are clasped, vows are whispered, not in a chapel, not under rose-covered arches, but beside the fire pit, with a goat as your only witness. It's not the wedding you dreamed of, it's the wedding you needed. And when the priest says, you may speak your vow, you look into their eyes and say, I will love you through sickness and sickness. They laugh through tears. Me too. That night, you lie beside each other, not touching yet, still cautious, but your fingers brush, and you realize, in a time where nothing is certain, this is not the future, not the village, not even breath, but love. Love is real, even when the world holds its breath. The air smells different now, heavier, less of bread and damp hay, more of smoke, vinegar, and panic. Still, life goes on, or tries to. You wake each morning beside your now official partner and wonder, how did we go from apples at the fair to marriage during a plague? And yet, here you are. But you need something lighter now, something to remind you that not everything is crumbling. So you suggest it, a village dance. Seriously, they ask. Now? You grin. People need something. a reason to smile, or at least trip over each other in public. And you're right, because when the world feels fragile, laughter becomes a kind of resistance, and dancing, awkward, joyful, breathless, becomes a strange kind of defiance. So, quietly, people begin preparing. The baker promises to make sweet rolls, the old tanner offers a fiddler's cousin, and the blacksmith volunteers his shed, cleared of all sharp things, as the venue. It's not a grand ballroom, it's drafty, smells faintly of hoof polish, and features one corner that might still be haunted by a goose. But it's perfect. Mainstream historians confirm that village dances were a central part of social life, especially in times of hardship. Feasts, religious holidays, and even harvest festivals often included dancing as a way to affirm life, love, and community. But these dances weren't just about joy, they were negotiations. A glance across the room, a shared reel, a slightly too lingering hand during a spin. Each movement had meaning. And yes, someone always ended up crying behind a barrel of cider. You arrive at the dance wearing your cleanest tunic. Your partner wears a shawl that used to belong to their grandmother. The fiddler begins to play. The rhythm is uneven, enthusiastic, and exactly what the village needs. You don't start dancing right away. You watch. You sip weak ale. You try not to trip on the uneven floorboards. Then someone grabs your hand. It's them. You stumble onto the floor. A circle forms. Hands clap. Feet stomp. You spin once. Almost fall into the blacksmith's wife. Apologize. And keep going. And then it happens. The eye contact. That moment where everything else fades. Music. Footsteps. Flickering torchlight. And it's just you and them. Grinning. Like fools. Hearts racing. Breath mingling. This is love in motion. Not quiet. Not whispered. Not tucked behind hedges. Loud. Messy. Beautiful. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some medieval French dances, couples weren't allowed to face each other directly until the third round, because it was believed that prolonged eye contact could inflame the blood too soon. Apparently, nothing says dangerous like locking eyes during a folk jig. You and your partner break every rule. Eye contact from the first step, hands too close, laughter too loud. Even Matilda, your accidental chaperone turned matchmaker, dances nearby with the cooper's apprentice, giggling madly. But dancing is never just dancing, because when someone across the room stares too long at your partner, your chest tightens. And when your partner notices you glancing at the blacksmith's niece, they raise an eyebrow. Jealousy? Maybe. But also territorial joy. You chose each other. And even in the chaos, the music, the ever-present risk of stepping on someone's foot and being banned for life, you're reminded of that choice. Historians still argue whether these dances were courtship rituals or community relief valves. Likely both. What's certain is that they gave people a chance to breathe, to connect, to imagine something better, even if just for a night. The song ends. People cheer. Someone suggests a slower tune. The fiddler obliges. You and your partner move together this time, not in a circle, but swaying gently, forehead to forehead, in your own little world. You say, "I've never danced before." They say, "You still haven't, but I love you anyway." You both laugh. Outside, the wind carries faint traces of worry, but inside, the torches glow, the music plays, and for the first time in weeks, the village forgets to be afraid. Love, tonight, wears worn shoes, smells faintly of sweat and flour, and stumbles on every fourth step. But it's here, alive and dancing. The dance is over, the music has faded, and the blacksmith's shed is now just a shed again, dusty, empty, and faintly echoing with laughter that already feels like it happened a year ago. You and your partner walk home slowly beneath the stars, shoes in hand, cheeks still warm. There's a peace in it, a rare, quiet peace. And then, as you round the corner near your house, you see it, a cluster of women gathered in a tight circle, whispering like wind through a graveyard. They glance your way, then back to each other. You already know what this is. This is virtue talk, because love in the Middle Ages, especially for women, wasn't just about affection or compatibility. It was about virtue, virginity, and public judgment. And yes, sometimes it was cruel. Mainstream historians agree that virginity was considered a woman's most valuable asset in medieval Christian Europe, especially before marriage. For noble women, it was legally and politically critical. For peasant girls, it was more about reputation, Because once a girl's name was muddied, her future prospects shriveled like a raisin in the sun. Your partner looks at you. Ignore them. You try. But it's hard. Because you know they're not whispering about how well you dance or how poetic your love letters are. They're whispering about how late you walked home, about how close you stood during the last song, about whether or not the priest knows you're married, or if that was just gossip too. Truth doesn't always win against rumors. You sit on the stone wall outside your home, the same wall where you once dared to dream of something more than grain sacks and goats. And now you're wondering, is love enough? Your partner sighs. I wish they'd ask instead of assume. You nod. They're not brave enough. But inside, part of you aches, because this world doesn't forgive easily. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some towns, a woman accused of losing her virginity before marriage could be publicly weighed. Yes, weighed. Under the belief that a loss of virtue somehow made a girl physically lighter. It's as ridiculous as it sounds, and somehow terrifyingly real. Still, people found ways to protect their reputations. Some couples married in secret and only revealed it when a child was on the way. Others staged public blessings of their union, complete with symbolic gestures like hand-fasting, bread breaking, or even sharing a bedroll under a family banner. You and your partner look at each other and decide, tomorrow you'll go to the chapel, again, this time, not to whisper vows in secret, but to bless them, publicly, to walk through the front door, hand in hand, and say, yes, we are married. Yes, it is real. And no, you don't get to decide how pure our love is. It's bold, maybe too bold, but you've had enough of whispering. Historians still argue about whether virtue was weaponized more by clergy or by neighbors. But everyone agrees on one thing. Women carried the heavier burden. A man with a scandal, he's mischievous. A woman, she's ruined. Your partner touches your hand. Let them weigh my heart, not my body. You squeeze back. And if they try, I'll throw a turnip at their heads. The next day you show up at the chapel before the first bell. The priest is confused but obliging. You kneel together, ask for a blessing and light a candle, a real one, right on the altar. And when you walk back out, the same group of women is there, silent this time. Maybe it's the candle, maybe it's the way your partner holds their head higher, or maybe it's just that even in a world obsessed with purity, real love still glows brighter than gossip. The days grow warmer. The frost that once clung to rooftops now melts into soft morning dew. Birds chirp louder. The village sheep begin their annual campaign of escape artistry. Everything smells like mud and possibility. And yet, you're gone. Not. Vanished exactly. Just missing from the usual places. Because today, you and your partner did something drastic. You ran away. Not far. Just far enough. Past the edge of the fields. Into the forest. The one filled with tall oaks, mossy boulders, and whispered stories about bandits, witches, and the occasional wandering minstrel who never came back. But to you, it's a wedding venue. See, the pressure got to you. The eyes, the muttered comments, the neighbors doing mathematical calculations every time your partner reached for bread. Is she showing? Did they marry in time? What's the shape of her ankle? Enough. So you took your shawls, your satchel, and the tiny loaf of oats. Bread someone shoved into your hands just in case, and left. You're heading toward the only place no one can judge you, a forest clearing, with soft moss, crooked trees, and the sound of wind sighing through branches like it understands. Your love better than people do. Mainstream historians confirm that forest weddings, though not legally binding in most places, were real. Runaway couples often eloped into woods or across borders to escape arranged marriages, social disapproval, or even the church's tight grip. These unions were often later blessed retroactively or quietly accepted once a child appeared. You find a spot, sun-dappled, quiet, private. Your partner lays down a blanket. You light a little candle, not for ritual, just for feeling. The flame flickers. You both smile. No priest, no blessing, no ceremony, just two people choosing each other. You each take a stick, draw a circle in the dirt. Step in, link pinkies. Your partner says, I'll love you till the wolves complain. You say, I'll love you past the goat's approval. Vows complete. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In parts of Scotland and northern England, hand fasting was considered a legitimate form of engagement or informal marriage. A couple would bind their hands together, literally, and speak their promises aloud. Some bound them with ribbon, others with their own belts. You use a piece of string that once held up your pants. It's oddly perfect. You lie back on, the moss staring at clouds. Your partner rests their head on your shoulder. This is better than a chapel, they say. You nod. And no Matilda, they laugh. Or window lady. You both laugh. And in that moment, you feel more married than you ever did during your hasty plague time blessing. Because this is a promise without performance. A bond without witnesses. Just love and dirt and probably a beetle crawling into your sock. You spend the evening roasting wild onions over a fire that barely stays lit. Your partner sings an old tune, off-key, beautiful. And then, when the stars appear, you both lie. Beneath them, hands still entwined. Historians still argue whether these woodland weddings were ever respected by communities. Some say they were seen as scandalous. Others believe that once love survived the night and the wolves didn't eat you, society had no choice but to catch up. In your case, you don't care, because for one night, just one, you were free, truly free, from rules, from reputation, from anyone else's idea of who you should love or how. Tomorrow, you'll return. There'll be whispers, maybe worse. But tonight, you sleep in the forest, married by moss, witnessed by stars, sanctified by choice. You return to the village at dawn, smelling like moss, onions, and something deeply poetic. Freedom, maybe, or slightly scorched love vows. You're arm in arm, heads high, pretending your forest elopement was completely normal. But the village, it notices. They don't say anything at first, just those long, knowing looks. The baker raises an eyebrow so high it nearly merges with his hairline. Matilda gasps with enough force to startle a pigeon. And the window lady, she isn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. She's holding her curtain wide open like it's theatre night. Still, you walk on. You are calm. You are dignified. You are radiating married energy, or maybe just mud. Things settle for about 3 days. Then come the rumors. Then comes the necklace. You hear about it first from your partner's cousin's friend's apprentice. Someone left something on the doorstep, she says, wide-eyed. A necklace and a note. You rush home. There it is, draped on a hook by your door, a silver chain. At its center, a tiny dagger charm, sharp-edged and ominously shiny. The note reads, "Love is loyalty, but betrayal cuts deeper than steel." You stare at it, blink, reread it, then laugh. Who writes poetry with threats anymore? Your partner isn't laughing. Do you think this is from someone? They ask. You both know what they mean, because it's time to talk about jealousy, betrayal, and dangerously pointy jewelry. Mainstream historians agree that medieval romances weren't always soft-eyed and flower-scented. Love triangles, vengeance, plots, and violently broken engagements were part of the social landscape, especially when land, dowries, or pride were involved. And jewelry, it wasn't just for show. Poison rings were real, tiny compartments hidden beneath gems used to carry toxins. Some say they were rare. Others think they were common enough to make any proposal slightly terrifying. You examine the necklace. It's clean. No secret latch, just symbolism. The dagger isn't meant to harm. It's meant to warn. Someone's angry. Someone who probably thought they had a chance with your partner. Or maybe with you. And someone now feels wronged. It could be the miller's son. Or the girl who used to braid your partner's hair at festivals. Or the tanner's apprentice who always joked about how he'd marry anyone who could name all 7 saints backwards. You could. He never laughed. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some regions of medieval Italy, romantic rivals were known to send each other challenge items, gloves, broken combs, or animal bones, symbols of dispute. Sometimes, this led to duels, sometimes to awkward dinners. Your situation? Less duel, more emotional sabotage. So you sit together that evening, the necklace between you. Your partner sighs. It was bound to happen. You nod. We chose something real. That makes people uncomfortable. They smile. Still want to run back to the forest. You grin. Only if we pack more bread this time. You make a decision. Together. You place the dagger necklace in a small wooden box, tie it shut, and leave it on the chapel step. The note you attach reads, "We choose peace. We choose each other. And we don't like sharp metaphors." The next day, it's gone. No one speaks of it again, but the message is clear. Historians still argue whether medieval lovers were more dramatic than we are today, or simply had fewer distractions and more daggers. Either way, the passion was real, and sometimes a little terrifying. You hold each other's hands tighter now, because you know, when you love someone in a world that runs on rules, shame, and suspicion, you become each other's safest place, even if that place occasionally comes with death-themed jewelry. The necklace incident fades, sort of. People stop whispering to your face, but you can feel the commentary curling through the village like wood smoke. You go about your days like nothing's changed. You mill the grain, mend the fence, argue over the last of the dried cherries. But something's off. It starts with your partner coming home late. They say they went to the chapel alone, needed space. You believe them, mostly. Then you notice the visits to the abbey. Small ones, quiet ones, just enough to wonder. And then, one evening, you find them kneeling in the side chapel, facing a statue of St. Bridget, whispering something too soft to catch. You don't interrupt, but it tugs at you. You ask later gently, "Is something wrong?" They hesitate. Then, "No, not wrong. Just complicated." And that's when it hits you. Monasteries, crushes, and celibacy fails. Because this isn't just about you anymore. This is about someone else. Someone inside those abbey walls. You don't ask directly, but your mind spins. See, in medieval times, forbidden love wasn't reserved for princesses and peasants. Sometimes the most intense longing happened in the places where desire was absolutely not allowed. Monasteries, nunneries, abbeys, sacred spaces, cloistered hearts, and vows of silence trying very hard not to break. Mainstream historians tell us that monastic crushes were very real. Letters, poems, and secret confessions hint at longing that couldn't be named. Monks and nuns often formed deep emotional attachments, sometimes spiritual, sometimes not so spiritual, and sometimes those bonds crossed lines. You remember brother Gerard. Soft voice, kind eyes, too many reasons to linger when he brought you water at the chapel well. And now, maybe it wasn't just the water. You talk to your partner again. Was it him? They pause. It was. A long time ago. Before you. You breathe. That should help, but it doesn't. Not fully. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In a 14th century English abbey, 2 nuns were caught writing love letters to each other. One even sneaked out during feast days to deliver gifts. The punishment? Public penance and reassignment to different convents. Love, it seems, finds loopholes, even in locked cloisters. You and your partner walk in silence that night, not angry, just adjusting, because love isn't always straightforward. It's not always tidy, and sometimes, even in marriage, there are echoes of past emotions still rattling around like dried beans in a pot. You try to be mature. Do you still love him? They shake their head. I love you, but he was the first person who saw me, really saw me. You nod slowly. Then I'm grateful to him for starting what I get to finish. They smile. You're not finishing. We're building. You exhale. A slow, leafy breath. Historians still argue whether monasteries were true refuges from emotion, or pressure cookers that turned affection into something deeper, darker, and more dangerous. Some scholars see monastic life as suppressive. Others see it as profoundly human, just hidden. You now see it differently too. You and your partner light a candle for brother Gerard, not as a symbol of guilt, but as a small flame of forgiveness, of thanks, of moving on. Because real love, it holds space for the past, without getting stuck in it. You walk home together, the stars above you blinking slowly like they understand. And even though it wasn't perfect, tonight, you feel closer. It begins with a funeral, not someone close, just a man from the next village over. A shepherd, quiet, mostly toothless, always smelled like soup. The kind of person who quietly disappears, but whose passing makes you look at your own life with new, unblinking eyes. You and your partner attend the service. You stand at the edge of the small procession, heads bowed. The priest mutters prayers. The grave is shallow. The air smells like wet earth and pine sap. Afterward, you walk home in silence, and then your partner says softly, "Do you think people will talk about us when we're gone?" You pause. They already do. No, I mean really talk. The way they talk about lovers from the songs. You smile gently, because tonight, you're thinking about romantic tragedies that weren't Shakespeare. Forget the star-crossed Capulets and Montagues. Real medieval love stories were just as dramatic, just as painful and often twice as confusing. No sonnets, just livestock, weather, and wildly misinterpreted glances. You tell your partner, there was that miller's daughter in Cornwall, ran off with a knight. They ended up happy? No, they froze in a barn. Together though, they wince. That's tragic. It was winter. What did they expect? You both laugh, but underneath the humor is a truth. People fall hard, and when society pushes back, when religion, class, family, or plague steps in, love turns sharp-edged. Mainstream historians agree that medieval literature is filled with tragic romances, but many were inspired by real-life gossip and documented scandals. Lovers who defied expectations often ended in exile, prison, or worse. And yet, people kept loving. One story, from 13th century France, tells of a woman named Allais who fell for a scribe. Her family disapproved, sent her to a convent. She escaped. He met her outside the gates, and they tried to flee. They were caught. He was excommunicated. She disappeared from the records. No one knows what happened to her. You and your partner. Walk past the fields now, moonlight soft on your shoulders. If something happened to me, they say, would you tell our story? You stop. I'd make it better, you say. I'd say we danced through fire, rode off on horses, found a cave and built a home from moss and hope. They raise an eyebrow. That's ridiculous. Exactly. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In parts of Bohemia, romantic poems were written on tree bark, then tossed into rivers by heartbroken lovers. One recovered piece read, "She did not love me, but I left her my shoe." It's unclear what the shoe had to do with anything. Heartbreak is weird. Historians still argue whether commoners had as many dramatic love stories as nobles. Most agree that while peasants lacked castles and jewels, they had something stronger, urgency, with shorter lives, harder labor, and less freedom. Their romances were fast, intense, and often dangerously real. Your love isn't tragic. Not yet. But it could be. One bad harvest, one accusation, one fever, and that's what makes it feel even more precious. You hold your partner's hand as you reach the door to your home. We're not a song, they say. No, you reply. We're a saga. You both laugh again. But inside, your heart aches a little, because now you know every moment could be the one people remember. So you promise yourself, quietly, fiercely, to make each one count. Morning sunlight filters through the shutters, catching in dust motes that float like lazy fairies. You stretch, roll over, and blink at your partner, who's already up, already outside, already muttering something to a chicken that looks deeply unimpressed. You smile, because even with the drama, the whispers, and that whole dagger necklace incident, life continues. Ordinary, precious life. Still, you've noticed something odd. Lately, your partner keeps looking at the sky, talking about dreams, wondering aloud about destiny. It starts small, mentioning a dream about wolves, or how the moon was particularly large last night. Then it gets stranger. I think Saturn's against me, they say one morning while kneading bread dough. You blink. Who's Saturn? And so begins your adventure into astrology, dreams, and destiny dates. Because in the medieval world, if things felt uncertain, and when didn't they, you turned to the heavens, not just for weather predictions, but for guidance in love, fate, and whether your marriage was spiritually doomed or blessed by Venus herself. Mainstream historians confirm that astrology was a huge part of medieval life. Kings consulted astrologers before battle. Peasants timed weddings based on moon phases. Lovers carried little star charts alongside their turnip money. And dreams, those were messages. Divine, demonic, or digestive, it didn't matter. A white swan meant loyalty. A flooded field, betrayal. A cabbage with eyes? Don't ask. Your partner, it turns out, believes in this stuff. Kind of. They pull out a scrap of parchment one day. Look, they say, pointing. We met during a waxing crescent. That's a sign of growing affection. You squint. I thought it was just raining that day. They smile. It's both. Wet weather. Waxing moons. The universe wants us together. You chuckle. Remind me to thank the universe. But secretly, you kind of love it. Later that week, your partner invites you to the edge of the field, where a traveling astrologer has set up shop. He's got a long beard, a crooked tent, and smells like old onions and mystery. He squints at you both and asks, "Do you know your birth times?" "No," you say. "I barely know what day it is." He grunts. "I'll work with it." He charts your stars with a stick in the dirt. Then he says, You're ruled by Mercury, fast-talking, stubborn, protective. You look at your partner. That tracks. And you, he says, turning to them, are under Venus, romantic, daydreaming, a little dramatic. Your partner gasps. Rude but true. The astrologer nods. You're an odd match, but balanced. He hands you a token, a coin with a sun and moon carved into opposite sides. Keep it. Let it remind you that love doesn't always make sense, but it doesn't have to. You both thank him. You both walk away laughing. But that night, when you lie together beneath a sky smeared with stars, your partner whispers, "I dreamt we were birds, flying in different directions, but somehow still side by side." You don't ask what it means. You just kiss their hand and say, "Then let's fly weird, together." Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In the 14th century, a love manual from Italy actually recommended checking a partner's astrological sign before proposing. If their moon and your Mars weren't aligned, danger. If their Venus trined your Jupiter, instant wedding. Historians still argue whether astrology truly influenced daily decisions or just gave people something to blame when things went sideways. Either way, it mattered. To kings, to widows, to kids playing with wooden dolls, to you. You still don't know your exact birth hour, but you know that the stars above feel bigger when they're reflected in your partner's eyes. And tonight, they shine especially bright. You're both awake before the rooster, not by choice. There was a noise, low, wheezing, like a dying bellows. And now the two of you are sitting upright, clutching a blanket, and watching your neighbor's pig try to escape through your herb, patch, romance. But the pig's escape is a sign of something else too. Life is moving on. The gossip has shifted. The whispers are softer. People no longer talk about your elopement or your scandalous hand-holding. They're focused on the mill's new wheel, the price of barley, and that one shepherd who swears his sheep predicted rain. And with that shift, something unexpected arrives. Second chances. Today, your partner meets someone at the market, a widow, older, tough, wears her hair in a bun so tight it could deflect arrows. The two talk. They laugh. They exchange something. Flour, maybe, or just stories. You ask about it later. She lost someone, your partner says. Before the plague, she said she never thought she'd laugh again. You nod slowly, because this world doesn't offer many do-overs. But for those who've survived, loss, sickness, shame, love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Welcome to the world of widows, second chances, and scandalous reboots. Mainstream historians remind us that medieval widows were often caught in a strange space. On one hand, they had more freedom than unmarried women, legal rights, control of property, sometimes even business ownership. On the other, society still expected them to mourn, and only mourn. Too much cheer, suspicious, a new suitor, downright indecent, especially if the late husband's body wasn't fully cold. And yet, love after loss happened, constantly. You start to notice it around the village. The tanner's widow chatting with the baker's brother. Two elderly men walking, together at dusk, one telling a joke with his hands, the other laughing too loud. A girl with a scar under her eye bringing flowers to a man with shaking hands. No one says romance, but you can feel it. You and your partner talk about it that night. Do you think we'll still love each other when we're old? They ask. You shrug. I plan on arguing with you over soup until we're 90. They grin. That's not the same as love. It is in our house. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some 15th century French towns, widows were allowed to remarry without family permission, a rare privilege. But if they wore red at the ceremony, scandal. Red was seen as a color of boldness, too much happiness, too soon. You meet one of these scandals a few days later. Her name is Elise, twice widowed, wears red on purpose, runs the village's best cider stand. She tells you, first marriage, I was a girl. Second, I was desperate. This time, I just want someone who won't complain when I sing off key. You respect that. Historians still argue whether late in life love was socially respected or quietly tolerated, but the record shows people kept falling again and again. Because what else can you do? You sit outside your cottage that evening. Your partner rests their head on your shoulder. You sip cider. And across the road, Elise sings, terribly, while her new husband, who used to swear he'd never remarry, plays the lute like he means it. You lean in, whisper, if I lose you, I'll never love again. They whisper back, yes, you will. and I'll haunt you to make sure they're good enough." You both laugh, because even in a world where death always waits around the corner, love keeps knocking, and sometimes we're lucky enough to answer. The morning begins with the sound of hooves, not gentle ones, not trotting, galloping, urgent. You rush outside, expecting fire, plague, or at the very least, an angry goose uprising. Instead, you see it, the Baron's son, silk sleeves, a ridiculous hat, a horse too shiny for anyone's good, and right behind him, your partner. They're not on the horse, they're just walking beside it, casually, talking, laughing. You freeze, because this isn't just a noble being friendly. This is something else, and suddenly, your heartbeat is galloping faster than his horse. Welcome to the tightrope of cross-class flings and getting caught. Later, you try to stay calm. You try not to mention it, but then you do. So, you and the Baron's son, are we friends now with the people who tax our eggs? Your partner blinks. He stopped by to ask about herbal remedies. His sister's ill. You nod. And the hat was necessary for that. They laugh, but there's a pause. A little pause. The kind that grows into jealousy if you let it. Because you know how this works. Class is everything here. You're not equals. Not really. And that glittering fool, he could offer your partner a different life. A better one. One with walls that don't leak, floors that don't creak, and food that doesn't depend on weather. Mainstream historians confirm that medieval societies were deeply class stratified. Peasants rarely married up. If a noble did fall for a commoner, it usually ended in scandal, annulment, or very secret arrangements involving lots of hush money and sudden relocations. But it did happen, and when it did, people noticed and judged. That evening, the whispers begin. I saw them talking. He smiled at her. He gave her an orange. An orange. You try to let it go, but the next morning, a small bundle shows up at your door. It's fancy linen, folded, wrapped in ribbon. You stare at it, hard, then you burn it. Your partner arrives an hour later, flushed from the field, hair windswept, smelling like time and effort. You don't speak, not at first. Then you say, if he wants you, he can offer you everything I can't. They stare at you. Like what? Pillows that aren't lumpy. You laugh, just once, then sigh. They add, he doesn't know me. Not like you. Not like this. And you believe them. Mostly, but it still stings. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In 15th century France, there was a rumor about a nobleman who fell in love with a baker's daughter. He disguised himself, worked in her father's bakery, and tried to win her heart with his bread skills. It almost worked, until his horse gave him away. Historians still argue how many of these cross-class stories were true, and how many were fairy tales. Either way, they left an impression. Love ignores titles, but society doesn't. You and your partner make peace that night, slowly, carefully, the way only two people who've survived public scandal and a field full of judgmental chickens can. You ask, if he had proposed, what would you have said? They smile. I'd have said yes. You blink. To you, they add. Only you. Even if you burn linen without asking. You roll your eyes. It had ribbon. Still dramatic. But you're laughing now. And deep down, you know the truth. If someone offers them gold, comfort, and velvet, they'll still pick your lumpy bed and crooked roof, because love doesn't need a title. It just needs two people, choosing each other, again and again, even when the Baron's son rides in with oranges. You're gathering firewood when it happens. A shriek, loud, sharp, unmistakably human. You drop your bundle and sprint toward the sound, around the bakery, past the sheep pen, through the alley behind the butcher's, until you see it. Two people, tangled, not in love, in punishment, hands bound, eyes down, kneeling in the square like statues made of shame. A voice announces their crime. Unlawful relations. Twice. In the chapel gardens. There's a pause. Then, the punishment. 6 lashes each. Public. You feel your stomach drop, because you know them. One is the miller's niece. The other, a visiting mason who once complimented your partner's apples. You never thought much of it. Until now. Welcome to the unromantic aftermath of public punishments and private affairs. The lash cracks. People flinch. Some turn away. Others don't. There's muttering, whispering. A child asks too loudly, "What's unlawful?" And her mother shushes her so fast it echoes. Mainstream historians confirm that public punishment for romantic or sexual misconduct was common in medieval Europe, especially when the church or the community felt threatened. Adultery, premarital, intimacy, unchaperoned visits, even suggestive letters could lead to stocks, whipping, or forced penance in front of the entire town. You watch, frozen. Not because you condone it, but because it could have been you, the gardens, the forest, the dance. You and your partner were never caught, but not for lack of trying. You meet them behind your cottage later, under the small oak that hides most sins and all secrets. You tell them what happened. Their face goes pale. I heard the screams, they whisper. I just didn't know. You both sit for a long time, silent. The wind moves gently through the grass. Somewhere nearby, someone sings a hymn, soft, trembling. Finally, they say, they were only in love. You nod, like us. They look at you. Would you take lashes for me? You pause. Then, I'd take 10, but I'd rather not get caught. They laugh once, bitter and bright. Let's stay invisible then. You smile. Invisible and madly in love. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In 14th century England, couples caught in dishonorable embrace were sometimes made to walk backward through the village, wearing nothing but flour sacks. This was considered merciful. The alternative, stocks and jeers for 3 days. Historians still argue whether these public punishments worked as deterrents or simply fueled fear, but everyone agrees they hurt, not just physically, but emotionally. Entire lives could be undone in 10 minutes of public humiliation. You and your partner take extra care now. You meet in brighter places, speak more carefully, say less with words, more with glances, and yet the love stays, maybe even grows, because now it's wrapped in awareness, in knowing what could be lost, what still might be. Later that week, the punished lovers leave town. They don't say goodbye, just vanish, quietly. You light a candle for them in the chapel, say nothing aloud, but as the wax drips, you whisper, in your head, I'm sorry, I saw you, I loved what you had, I wish the world had too. Weeks pass. No new scandals, no lashings, no mysterious jewelry left at doorsteps. The village exhales. The gossip settles into its usual rhythm. Whose sheep escaped? Which cow gave birth in the wrong barn? And whether or not the tanner's beard is growing suspiciously fast. You and your partner? You find your rhythm too. It's not grand. There are no secret gardens now. No bardic love songs or flirty letter deliveries. But there's something else. A stew bubbling gently over the hearth. A cloak mended by hand. The comfort of a shared. Silence that doesn't demand to be filled. This is quiet companionship in old age. Even if you're not quite old yet, but you feel older. Maybe not in bones, but in spirit. You've been through things. Weathered storms. Ducked under wagging fingers. Learned when to speak and when to let the breeze do the talking. One morning, you wake up early. The fire's still low. Your partner is still asleep. Their hand rests lightly on yours. And for a moment, you don't move. This is what you never thought medieval love would be. You thought it would be dramatic, star-crossed, tragic maybe, but not this warm, this ordinary. You spend the day, tending to small things, picking herbs, sharpening tools, swapping stories with your neighbor, who always insists on telling you the same tale about his runaway ox. You listen anyway. Mainstream historians often focus on the drama of medieval love, courtship, marriage, scandal, but few talk about what came after, the quiet years, the ones filled with aching knees, small smiles, and an ever-growing list of inside jokes. Some say older couples stayed together out of duty. Others insist love deepened with time, settling into a kind of peace that no new romance could match. You believe the latter. That evening, you and your partner sit outside, watching. The stars blink into life. You pass a bowl of soup back and forth, not because you can't have your own, but because it just tastes better that way. They ask, do you remember the fair? You nod. You buy the apple cart, me pretending to be interested in bruised pears. They laugh. You were terrible at pretending. You nudge them. You were worse. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In rural Germany, some villages held annual re-choosing days, where older couples could publicly declare, again, whether they wanted to remain together. Most did, a few didn't. The ceremony included shared bread and wine, and sometimes, just for fun, a race to the town well. You and your partner don't need a race, but you do need something So you lean in and say, if I had to choose again, I'd still choose you. Even knowing about the garden incident, they smirk. Even knowing about the barren sun, you sigh dramatically. Even then, they kiss your cheek. That's true love. And maybe it is. Historians still argue whether love like this existed often, or if we just want to believe it did. But sitting here, under a sky full of stars, next to a partner who knows your favorite type of silence, you don't need records. You just need this moment. And maybe, tomorrow morning, someone in the village will whisper, they're still together, after everything, and someone else will smile and say, well, of course they are. The wind has changed. It's subtle, less harsh, more fragrant. You smell blooming lavender again, hints of warmed earth, even the sweetness of old apples tucked behind stalls. The village seems softer now, as if it's exhaled a long-held breath. You walk the square with your partner, not holding hands. You don't need to anymore. The connection between you is silent and obvious. It lives in the way you step in rhythm, how your shoulders tilt in conversation, how one always knows when the other is hungry, cold, or slightly annoyed at Matilda again. And as you pass the same apple cart where it all began, your partner stops and smiles. I still remember that apple, they say. I remember how you looked at me, like I'd just offered you the last one on earth. They laugh, and suddenly, you're standing on the very first page of your own story again. Which brings us here, full circle, because tonight is about something bigger than gardens or dances or mistaken astrological predictions. It's about what it all meant. Tonight, you reflect on how love changed and didn't. You think back to the nervous glances and poorly written letters, the hesitant touches, the whispered vows, the sleepless nights spent wondering if this thing you were building would survive scrutiny, sickness, and your own fears. It did. You changed. They changed. The village changed. But the way your heart pounds when they walk into a room, the way your mind still flips somersaults when they laugh, that stayed. Mainstream historians remind us that while the structures around love changed, arranged marriages, church influence, social class, the feelings rarely did. People still wanted the same things: to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved without condition. They just had to work harder for it. In many ways, your journey mirrors theirs. You navigated rules, dodged judgment, learned what it meant to stand together in a world that didn't always make room for affection. But here's the surprise. Once the world grew quieter, once the wagging fingers pointed elsewhere, love became simple again, not less, just quieter. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some medieval manuscripts, scribes doodled tiny lovers in the margins, holding hands, kissing, even hiding under plants. No names, no explanations, just small reminders that even in books about war and law, someone was still dreaming of love. You think of that now, you and your partner, doodled in the margins of history, not kings, not saints, just two people who chose each other again and again, through gossip and goat attacks and out-of-tune ballads. Historians still argue about what love meant in the Middle Ages. But you lived it, you know. You reach the chapel gate. The candles inside flicker low. No crowd, no priest, just you and them. You kneel, not to pray, but to rest, to say thank you, to mark the moment. Then you rise, turn, and walk home. Tomorrow will be ordinary. That's the best part. Because love, when it lasts, isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's stew. Sometimes it's a good blanket. Sometimes it's someone who still laughs when you burn the bread again. And sometimes it's the quiet knowledge that even in the toughest century imaginable, you found your forever.